on March 28th. We're probably more likely to see this implemented at the 4, 5, and 6A level based upon where we are right now, but not certain as to where we're going to be, as we progress through the next several weeks, as this becomes critical and we head to some major decision points and some decision days. So that's a summary of what the model looks like. But what it looks like in terms of a calendar really is informed by the parameters under which we would navigate this. So we're going to go to the second tab. Again, if you've got a question and you want to put it in the chat, you might just send the word chat question, and then we'll pause. Otherwise, I'm going to keep plugging along. Anything in yellow is new since the time it was given to you. And I don't want to read all of the parameters because I don't want you to feel like, hey, this is something that you haven't done, but I want to kind of explain those as we go through the different parameters to make sure you understand why they're there, why we believe as a staff they're important. First, as we look at this, we always remember that our goal is to provide these opportunities and that participation is optional. We believe that it is appropriate, and if we conduct championships in the fall, that is our state championship series, and we would not award championships to those potentially fewer schools that participate in the alternative fall season to be conducted in March and April. So as we begin this, we begin with the premise that we're not going to have any postseason in the alternative fall season. Of course, we want to have these activities in the fall whenever it's possible to do that. And choosing to move to that is really an activity by activity decision at a local school. Your football and volleyball teams may participate in the fall season, but cross country, golf, tennis, move on. Gymnastics moves on. They had their fall season. And that's okay, because the more we can have kids experience through the fall, the better. But it's got to be appropriate for your local conditions to do that. We felt as if, and I took out number 11, the line 11 on that, because we have addressed that with some guidance later, and we'll point to that. That begins a little bit later in these parameters. We believe that it is important for us to know by count day, September 21, what your intention is regarding the alternative fall season. That allows for planning to take place. We may not be final there because there may be a team that's still practicing, still hoping to be able to get back into competition. It may not pan out, so they may move from attempting to suspended, i.e. canceled, before the season ends. We'll talk about how that's addressed as we move forward. We believe that leagues need to move to this primarily together so that you have opportunities for opponents in your geographic area to play. Okay, we know that as we begin to resume, whether we have our fall season now or we have it throughout the year, all of these big events that are beyond your region need to be discouraged. We know we need to have some relief on our cooperative program, and know we're past some deadlines, and know that two schools may be in a cooperative agreement and one of those is able to move forward and another one is not. Find some new partners. Let's be flexible in that regard, not abandoning someone, but providing the relief that they may need in those locally established and locally implemented cooperative agreements. As I look at number 18, we know that if we want to have eligibility for the spring season, that all of our components of eligibility are going to be in place. You've got to academically be eligible. You've got to be a good CIS. You've got to be enrolled. You've got to be attending. All of those are in place. And right now, if once we move to that alternative season as a school, then Rule 22 becomes applicable in a new way. Because right now, if a school is suspended, if I'm at Olathe North and my season is suspended, it's not canceled, our schools are still under, our student athletes are still subject to the outside competition and season of sport rules. If you cancel that season and move to the alternative season, then you can begin to participate much like you would any other time during the school year and outside the season of sport. Okay, so we think that that is appropriate for us as we move forward. Moving through, if we have kids that transfer, they only get one football season this year. It's either in the fall or it's in the spring. If you're in a school that was suspended and you've participated in 4 games, when you go to the spring and you go to a school, and if there's legitimate transfer reasons to do that, you may pick up the remainder of that season, but most likely your season for football is done because you don't get 2 different seasons in that same activity. The maximum number of weeks for participating is congruent to the maximum allowed in a traditional season. So I can't get 10 football games out of this scenario by matching what I could get done in the regular fall and what I would get in the alternative fall. And as we continue on down with this, the maximum number of contests is detailed starting in 26 and 20. Oh, by the way, sorry, I didn't mean to skip number 25 because that's key for us. We have some days that we have to protect in the spring. These are performing arts days. We did move from my original draft or from our original draft off of an ending day of May 1. And that's because May 1's a championship day for us. That is our state speech day. And we don't want to have kids choosing not to go to state speech because they're playing their final volleyball match or their final football game or whatever that final thing happened to be. So we moved that forward to Friday, April 30th. Likewise, we want to protect April 24th because April 24th is Music Performance Day. That is our solos and small ensembles participate that day, and we don't want kids to have to choose between going to those and going to another activity. So we want to protect that day. Again, April 14th and 15th are already protected in your respective area, and you cannot schedule on those 2 days, and we need to make sure that is known for those that may move to an alternative fall. You're going to be looking for every day possible to compete. It would not be the 14th or 15th in your area. It would not be April 24th. Okay, and then I look at 26 through 32, and those specific activities are addressed in terms of what your final day would be. So I can't practice all fall long for cross country and practice all the way up until what would be the state meet as part of a school practice. If I am going to have to, if I compete after or if I practice beyond October 10th, my cross country season is going to be in the fall. I cannot be in the alternative fall season in March and April. You see the ending dates, and that is date specific. And it's also competition limit specific. That's why I crossed out that one up above. Okay. One of the anchors, one of the pillars for this is ending our winter sports on time. If we have to delay the start of winter sports or the end of winter sports, everything else is impacted in this. And it's really the end is the anchor of those winter sports. And remember, what we're trying to do is have the least impact or no impact, if possible, on spring sports. Again, we expect them to begin on time, but there's no guarantee on that. And we also know there's probably going to have to be some adjustments to summer. We're not prepared to roll those out right now, but we will be in plenty of time so that we can schedule spirit opportunities. We can have coaches know what they can and cannot do with their coaches camps and how they can interact with athletes, if they can interact with athletes over the course of the summer. The yellow are new bullets for you. We had not, my mistake, addressed some of the middle school issues that are important. Middle schools always have been able to schedule from the Monday of standardized calendar week 7 through their last day of school attendance. That remains the case this year. However, at the middle school level, without that state championship at the end, our suggestion is the focus should be more on intramurals and on skill building and skill development. So with those opportunities, you're in that bubble, you're closer to home, easier to do at some of the larger schools. more difficult to do in the schools where they don't have opposing teams in which they can compete against. So you may have to have some geographic interscholastic opportunities at the middle school level in this year. Okay, and then finally, we want to have championships, but we recognize that those championships may well be on hold, but it's too early. It's premature to make those decisions. We believe a month out still gives our host sites plenty of time. They're going to be prepared to implement the plan that our administrators have in place, but it is not right for us to pull the plug on those right at this point in time. So that takes us through those considerations. We know a month out, we would make an announcement about golf and tennis, and those are going to be the first two that we come up across in the first decision points. But again, those will come in mid-September as we get closer to those. That takes us through some of the parameters that this model was developed upon. And then we get to the rule modifications. We know all of these rules, and we're not going to go through each one of them. There's specific language that says you're going to start your activities now. Actually, the first one, 30-2-1, says you're going to end with the traditional championship date. Well, we're going to create a new calendar. We need to have some relief in that regard. What's new is our request of you to ask, once I fix my spelling, that the board of directors, if we have this special meeting, would to empower you, the executive board, to work with the staff and to make decisions that are more narrow in scope to the respective activities that take place in the fall. For instance, we've been told from a couple schools that it's really difficult to schedule your cross-country meets or to reschedule your cross-country meets if you've got 10 teams coming and a limited amount of daylight. I want to spread them out. I need to start some at 1 o'clock and some at 4 o'clock, but I can't provide that relief in my own invitational because I only am allowed 2 meets that start before the end of the school day. Well, as an executive board, we'd like for you to be able to debate that and have that discussion and those decisions based upon recommendations from staff. We would never ask you or empower you to say, let's set aside eligibility rules. That is a full board of director decision. That's not just a group of 9. Though you're capable and you're reflective of that, that puts you in an awkward spot. We want to try and make sure that we let the board do that overall governance piece and the executive board do the more minute and minutia of implementing these tournaments and allowing these regular season contests to go on within the spirit of the rules, but adjusted due to the constraints that we have, the environmental conditions that we have. I'm going to pause and ask our staff to jump in if there's anything that I have missed that needs to be emphasized as we then turn it to you for discussion. So that's the presentation of the schedules and models, but staff, I'm looking around the room. Anybody have anything that they want to add to the narrative that's been provided thus far? Not hearing any, not seeing any. They're all here with me, even though they zoomed that in, so only one guy's on the camera. I think that's a Jeremy Holiday effort there to keep them off screen. But I want to go now back. We'll start with questions that you have on the summary calendar, noting that when we look at that summary calendar, we know that it's a challenge of overlapping seasons. If we were to end up with the alternative schedule, we have an overlap on the front when basketball is still being played, and that is the only winter sport. Bowling has a week of overlap, and basketball would have 2 weeks of overlap with that. But we feel like that's doable because basketball, after 2 days of the alternative start, is down to 50%. 3 days, down to 50% of the participating schools, and after 1 week is down to just your state tournament teams. So for most of the schools, at most, it's a 1 week overlap and not beyond that. On the back end of that, we have more of an overlap. And I'm not sure how to overcome that, but I certainly recognize that you've got challenges for your fall sports on top of your spring sports, because you're sharing facilities, you're sharing coaches, and kids. We don't want to kill kids when they get in a tug of war between their fall sport coach and their spring sport coach. So we tried to minimize that. There's some tweaks that we can do to shorten a little bit more, but this was our starting point, and we bring that to you. Those are the most glaring errors if we have to go to this this particular model. So your thoughts and open up for discussion at this point. And we'll just sit and listen to what the board has to say or questions that you have about this.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, staff. Okay, board, any questions or comments for Bill and the staff?
Bill, could you go over again for me, and I just want to make sure I'm hearing it correctly, but down at the bottom of this screen that's being shared right now, there was a pods of 1A, 2A, 3A bands, I guess you called them. In order to implement the alternative dates, you have to have more than half of those schools choose the alternative date. Is that correct?
That is correct. And the rationale behind that was we need a trigger to know when to implement this. If this is only an issue, if the delayed start is only necessary for football in a geographically proximate area or maybe within a classification, it doesn't seem right that we impose a delayed start to the rest of the state of Kansas. Now, I know that Western Kansas cares about the plight of the Johnson County and Sedgwick County schools, but they're not living it like those groups of schools are doing. And so by putting these bands together, we allow for regular season competition because everybody's available at the same time, and we allow for a common ending for those two groups of schools if we have to do that. So we felt like 1, 2, and 3 have more, if we have more than half of those schools with one activity delayed, we put all of the championships on the later calendar, start and end days later. Likewise with the 4, 5, and 6s. If we have 55 4, 5, and 6A schools that have one or more activity delayed and move to the alternative fall season, we would delay the championship for the start and ending of all of those spring championship events. Okay, and again, the championship part is not the part I'm worried about. The part I'm worried about is a regular season competition, and you got to have opponents to play if you're going to have a regular season. And we did that. We did a quick analysis of our leagues that have 3A, 4A schools, and there are a few of those. Brent can tell us exactly how many that really have several 3A, 4A schools that are kind of that mix, but it seems like more of the break is 1, 2, 3A together, 4, 5, and 6 together. Did that answer your question, Mr. Stonebreaker?
Yeah, it did. Was that added on prior to this weekend?
Yeah,
or after this weekend, I mean?
Yeah, that was in the draft I sent you early this afternoon.
Yes. Okay.
It was
Okay.
us trying to find that trigger.
Okay. Yep. That answers my question on that.
Anyone else have any questions or comments?
Bill, this is Mike. I'm still a little confused on the spring activities. We would, if we have a band that triggers, then our championships would be in June possibly versus in May. Is that what we're saying?
Yes, sir. For half of the class, for that band of classes in all of their activities. So
If one activity goes, they all go. Is that correct?
that is correct. In that class, in that
Right.
band of classes.
Okay, and then we would try to still have championships.
Pardon me?
we would still try to have championships.
That is correct. We are still efforting championships in the fall for the traditional season, in the winter for a season that right now is unaffected, and in the spring, whether you are on the regular start, end in March or end in May, or the delayed start, delayed end in June.
So those schools that elected to go traditional, example, track and field, then they would not have a championship season.
Yeah, spring is normal. It just may be delayed for some of the schools, or it may not be delayed at all, but there will be championships. At this point, we still plan on championships for all of our spring activities.
Thank you.
This is Stina, and I have a question about eligibility. My daughter works for a fundraising company, and she has colleagues in Nebraska and Iowa, and they're telling her that parents that have some money that live in the Kansas City area, whose season has been canceled, so to speak, they are evidently sending their children to Nebraska and Iowa to play, I assume, in club sports, because a lot of those locations, like some of the bigger cities anyway, have determined that they would have club sports instead of school sports. So how can you talk about how that might affect those students if they go ahead and play or play part of that season and come back and try to also be involved in the regular or in the alternative season?
You bet. Let's talk transfer, because that's a big topic. We get a lot of questions about that. I don't know all of the implications for a student transferring out of a Kansas school and into an Iowa or Nebraska school. They have their own parameters, or into Missouri for that matter. We're all very similar though. And what the similar component is twofold. Number one is transfer rules exist to inhibit school shopping for the purposes of activity participation. And if you're going to another school just to participate, that may not be the best and only reason that you should use to evaluate where your kid's going to get their education. The second reason that the transfer rule exists is to protect the kids in those school programs where a student may be transferring into. So if I have a student that is planning to be the starting quarterback at a respective school in Nebraska, and here comes some kid from Kansas that has no connection to the Nebraska school, he's going to take a starting spot away from, playing time away from, a roster spot potentially in some of our select activities where you have to earn the team, make the team, from a kid that's been there and is connected to that school. So that's why we have that rule. If they're going to participate in club activities and they stay enrolled in the school, Kansas school, we have kids all the time that don't participate, but they're still students in that school. They maintain eligibility. They're not a transfer student until they start attending school in Nebraska or Iowa or at a different Kansas school. And in that case, their rules would apply. If they are attending and enrolled and participating away from a Kansas school, and then they come back, then our rules apply. So our rules would say that a student that transfers in to our school, they move in as a bona fide family move, have full eligibility. But a bona fide move is not going to live with an aunt and uncle. in a different state, or a grandparent, or a friend. It's going, the whole family sells their home, they sever their lease, and they go live as a family in a new community. If they do that in reverse and come back, there may be eligibility unless it's activity motivated. But if they just go and then come back, they're going to be ineligible when they return for varsity level competition. They may have non-varsity level competition eligibility, but they would not have varsity level eligibility unless that bona fide move took place or unless a hardship was approved. And right now, I'm still operating with hardships being non-evaluative of the school's academic offerings. You do not get a hardship because you don't think this school is as good as another school. That's the state board's job to determine the quality of the school, not the Activities Association. I have 356 schools that are tied to provide the very best opportunity for education for our kids. I can't say one is better than another. That's not our role. So if a parent makes that choice to change, then they're choosing to go. It is not a hardship. They can stay where they are. They're choosing to go. That's fine. Eligibility follows with that choice. So as kid going to participate in a club, as long as they stay enrolled in our school, they're not going to lose eligibility. If they withdraw from our school and enroll in a different school, there's potential lost eligibility when they leave as well as when they come back.
Okay. Thank you.
Hey, Bill, Jason Herman. Couple questions. Somewhere I read, and I've been trying to look for it as I'm sitting here reading all the different documents. Somewhere I read, how is it going to impact if we are going to have a fall state championship? So, for example, I understand what could serve to push us into the alternative fall, but is there a number? And I thought I read it somewhere. I just can't seem to find it, of how many have to participate so that we could still compete for a state championship in the fall.
Jason, right now the staff have established that to be 8 or more.
Got it.
And here's the reason for that. It might not be the perfect number and certainly can be adjusted. Any part of this can be adjusted by the executive board. This was our starting point, and we believe there's validity to that 8 because you've got 8 within a class participating in 4, 5, and 6A. You're going to have less than 24 participating in the spring. And we consider that almost like a new activity. And for a new activity to have a championship, there have to be 24. Now, that doesn't mean that we couldn't at some point combine 5 and 6 down the road or combine 5 and 6 now. We always reserve that right. But you as a board do that based upon maybe a recommendation from us or from a member school. But right now we set that limit at 8 or more. We have a fall championship.
Perfect. And then clearly, and I know that I believe I'm saying this correctly. I just want to make sure anybody who's listening knows that COVID-19 would not be considered a hardship.
It's a hardship. It's a crisis, but it's not one that makes it necessary to change schools. Make no mistake, COVID-19 is a hardship, but it's universally applied to everybody. The hardship that you're experiencing at Olathe North is the same as at Olathe South.
Right.
Why
I know.
yeah.
Sorry, I was just trying to make clarity because I feel like I've answered that email I don't know how many times.
Yeah, and I tried, and I think our staff has done a really good job of responding to. I wouldn't say a few, I wouldn't say dozens, I'd say hundreds of emails relative to, it's a hardship to have to go. No, because you can still stay and be a student at Olathe North High School, at Cheney High School, at Sublette High School. You can still stay there. You can still get a really good education. You can still be connected with teachers and peers in that community.
Bill, I've got another question related to football on an alternate date. Currently when we start practices, we have the heat acclimatization period, and I realize that may not be an issue in March, but there are 14 practices scheduled. You have to participate as an individual, I believe, in at least 9 of those practices. If you are a state basketball player and then you miss the first 2 weeks of football. I mean, I know I'm kind of getting into the weeds a little bit, so you may or may not have answers to that, but I just want some comments in regards to that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think you're right on, Ken, in terms of that. But we've always had that. You know, I knew I got my track kids 2 weeks later because I came from a school where they were always in the state championship tournament. And those track kids that happened to be basketball players, not basketball kids that ran track. They were track kids that we loaned to the basketball team. When they came out for track, they were going to sit for 3 weeks because it's going to be the 2 weeks they're playing, and I gave them a week off. So we're used to that. You may not see the week off this year, but we want to make sure that we don't, it may be necessary for that mental break as well as for the physical break. And that really was why we would give them that extra week. It makes a really short season, but it still is a season and it still is an opportunity to participate. Anything else to add?
Bill, this is Mike again. Fall activities. Parsons High School starts the season. We play 3 games and then get shut down. Our kids ineligible to come back in the spring and play 5 more? Or no?
We'll go to that. That's what we're trying to get at with, and we asked specifically about football, Mike. And if I look at football, I'm going to look at line number 27. And it says, if I have at least 5 games in this fall season, I played 5 games in the fall season, or I practice or compete after October 17th, my season is over. However, if I only play 4 games and I stop practice on October 17th, on October 16th, on October 1st, September 1, whatever that happens to be, now I'm eligible to participate in the alternative fall season in March and April.
All games.
Up to the total number that a regular season would be,
Right.
which is 9. Right. You're never going to go more than 9 games combined between the fall
Okay.
and the new fall.
That's what I thought. I just want to be clear. Thank you.
Yeah. Maximum number of competition points between the combined seasons or competition limits.
Okay. Another spring sport question, please. If we had the band of 4, 5, and 6A went to the alternate season, and the 1, 2, 3A band did not, would there then be, as an example, a state track and field championship in May for 1, 2, 3A, and then a state championship competition in June for 4, 5, and 6A?
That is correct for both boys and girls.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, and one of the things that we point out is, we have really good venues for these championships to be conducted. The reality of it is, as we move forward into the fall, the winter, and the spring season, we may have to adjust those locations because it may not be conducive to bring a championship like state track into a community and have everybody together. Talk about the opposite of social distancing and of crowd size, state track. So it may be 6 different locations anyhow, because it's not wise to put everybody together. It may even be a situation where it's 12 track meets, and Mr. Lentz is going to go crazy with this, but we may have to do the boys one weekend and the girls the next weekend at one of our participating schools and have that be a hosted event at Olathe North. Another one at Wichita Northwest, another one at Hill City, and we just spread those around wherever that happens to be. We'd like to keep them together, but there's no guarantee.
Bill, I have a question. This is Greg, and Dina kind of hinted on it. And take a kid who would happen to say they do make a bona fide move to Colorado, Iowa, wherever, and play a fall sports season in another state, make a bona fide move back, and can that same person get it then a second season in the spring if the school that they go to is one who favored the alternative fall season being played in the spring?
Under our current rules, that's not possible. We actually see that every year in softball because we have some neighboring states that play softball. They're playing softball right now. Those kids transfer from Missouri into Kansas. They do not get a second softball season in a calendar year. And that would be the same in this regard. For a transfer student, either internal within the state or from out of state, do not get that second season.
Thank you.
Bill, I'm going to ask one more question, and I'm asking for, and I do want to bring up club sports. This is obviously going to have a huge impact for those kiddos that do play club volleyball, club softball, basketball, so on, all the above. Do our rules going to follow that similar path? Let's say, for example, that, and I'll use Olathe North, we can't play volleyball. We're going to do, there's enough to go ahead in the band to move volleyball to an alternative spring fall season, if you will. Are we going to release volleyball girls to play in club sports during September, October, November? And that would just be one example of all the above.
Yeah, certainly, Jason, that would be the intent of the Activities Association, is because we're no longer in the season of sport. The season of sport is defined to be for every individual athlete the day they first attend practice until the time their team is eliminated or the season ends. In this case, the season would end not in a final loss or the state tournament, but it would end because the school district has said, we're not going to have this activity anymore this year, this fall. So it gets pushed to the spring. Until the spring season begins, that kid can participate, still subject to, the 1/2 limit. You guys are familiar with that. In volleyball, 4 kids from the same school squad. In soccer, 6 from the same school squad. In football, 6 from the same school squad can practice or play on the same outside team during the school year outside the season of sport. Right now, they can only have private instruction. Right now, they can only do group conditioning. They can't do sport-specific work. But right now, they're still in the season because nobody has canceled. They've just suspended. Now, my biggest concern is what happens if we have a volleyball season in the spring, a boys soccer season in the spring, and that's prime time for those clubs. School kids are going to have to make, and families are going to have to potentially make some difficult decisions. Do I want to represent my school, or do I want to go to the club? I can't make that for a family. I can't make that. But I can tell you this, not every kid has an opportunity to go participate in club activities. Every kid has the opportunity to be on your school team if you've earned that opportunity through academic success and through appropriate other eligibility considerations. To be in a club sport, I just have to sign up and I've got to have somebody pay for it. And that makes it select and exclusive, where school activities are not select and exclusive according to those same parameters. So those schools that may have kids that choose to do that, I hope open up opportunities for kids that choose to do club. If they had that, then maybe some other kids have the opportunity to be part of the school team that wouldn't otherwise get to participate. That's a win in my regard. I'm not asking kids not to participate in school and to go to club. But if it does, my guess is schools will fill their rosters with other kids.
Absolutely. Well said. But yeah, you're right. A lot of those clubs, parents are paying now for what's going to happen in March, April, and May of next year. So
I understand that.
And Jason, just a couple of other things, in this time where it's still this gray area, they cannot be practicing with their club. And the second thing, other question that's come up, school coaches that are employed by the school cannot help or be a part of any of those club activities because it's during the school year outside the season of activity. But it's when the school decides, hey, we're no longer going to participate in fall volleyball, we're going to participate in alternate fall volleyball, those kids will be able to go participate, but their coaches can't coach them.
And so, and again, that right now, per this proposal, that date would be September 21st.
Actually, that's a floating date because
Okay.
it's going to be contingent upon when your school district says, you know what, we're not going to try this anymore. We're not going to play football for the remainder of this year. And a school board makes that very difficult decision based upon data appropriate for their area. They make that decision if that's where they end up. Then at that point, those kids can participate. Until that decision, no.
So it's based off of each individual one in our parameters, but the September 21st was just a suggestion. You'd like to know where schools would probably be.
Right. That's going to help our staff have a better sense of, we're going to be playing into June. Are we going to know? And it will help our schools have a better sense too, in terms of, well, if I go now, or do I stick it out?
So
And I think that's really the concern of identifying an earlier date. And that's a real logical day. It's a very infamous or famous day in school because that's our count day.
And
Sure.
it's also the date that we would have to start looking at what our postseason is going to look like for the schools who are continuing to participate.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
that's-
So that would be the latest date that I'm reading in our parameters is October 17th. So then by that time, we know football is either going to be fall or it's going to stay, it's going to move to the spring or it's going to stay in the fall. And then all the other dates for each of those other sports.
Right. And the reason that Fran's right is she nails it. I mean, she needs to know who to assign to a regional cross country meet on September 21. She can't wait till October 10th to create regional assignments. And that's just one of the 11 activities we have going on this fall, 9 competition activities.
Bill,
anything- Yep.
I'm gonna piggyback off of Jason's question. What about like spring sports participants playing during the school year outside the season? We typically fall back to the previous season for the numbers on that team, but we didn't have a season. What are your comments on that?
You're talking about right now?
Yeah, once we move into the fall and they're playing, for example, fall baseball. What restrictions do those kids have based on their team affiliation from the previous year? You get what I'm asking?
Yeah, and because we didn't have official rosters, we have a sense of, well, we don't have that. I think we have to go to the last roster that we had,
Okay.
whether you're a varsity baseball player or not. That would have been the fall of 2019. I'm sorry, the spring of 2019, not the spring of 2020, because spring of 2020 rosters make nothing. So that means I could have 5 varsity players from 2019, along with 5 freshmen and 5 sophomores, because those kids were never rostered as varsity baseball players.
Yeah, we would just revert back to the previous year then.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone have any further questions for Bill and the staff? Okay, with that, I guess I would entertain a motion.
A motion, Alan, would be absolutely appropriate, and/or discussion amongst the board. All of this has been questions. Now, do you guys have questions of each other? Anything that you would like to see modified? Anything that you would like to see adjusted from what the staff has presented to you? Because that's a part of that. There's nothing in here that is sacred. If you need to adjust a date, if you need to adjust a window, now would be the time to do that, because if we have a motion, I would hope that that motion would be to create a special board of directors meeting for later this week, where we would take this exact plan to that. And if you're comfortable with the plan as it is, I'm okay with that. But it would be better to go with what the executive board wants as the best plan to the broader 78-member board of directors. Because at that point in time, we really are honed in on the specific proposal. Yes, it can be tweaked, but you know how that is to do a writing project with a lot of people participating. It becomes counterproductive to anything really being accomplished. So going in with that final plan is really good. So a discussion or a motion, either one.
Okay, yeah, I would open up the floor if there's any discussion that needed to take place on the plan that's been presented, or if we're ready to make a motion and a vote for the plan that's been presented by the staff.
Mr. President, I don't know if it's a question, just maybe a comment, and I don't know of a better way. What I'm struggling with, I think, is we lost a whole spring season, and to, impact the spring season to try to salvage as much of a, fall season as possible. Lack of a better term, it seems like that spring group's kind of getting the shaft, but I'm not either suggesting a good way. I don't have a good way of to try to affect it less than what this does. That's, I think, what I'm struggling with the most. And I know one of the superintendent's comments, and I don't see that as being a doable thing really either, was, reducing the winter season, making the January, February winter season, the fall season would be 2 months in March and April, and spring would still be May, June. So it still impacts spring, I think, no matter how you cut it. But
Yeah.
I'm probably not alone in that, but it just seems like there's a lot to lose for the spring because they've already lost so much.
The good thing, though, is that they do get a full season. Whether it's late March, April, and May, or whether it starts later and goes through June, still at least going to get a full season, which is a plus for them.
And Mr. Castle, I'm going to interject just so you understand. We agree, Greg, it's not good, but we tried to minimize the impact to the spring. Right now, under this model, it may or may not be impacted. It's only impacted if the majority of schools within that band have to go to the alternative fall. If it's not, then the only impact is we've got stacked schedules for those few schools that do participate in the alternative fall. They've got fall on top of spring. But the season wasn't compromised in terms of length, just in terms of start time. But the same number of weeks, the same number of competitions are in the alternative spring season, the delayed start season. That's not the same for our fall folks. Our fall folks, if they go to the alternative, it's going to be truncated. We know that. Right now, the winter isn't truncated, but it could be if we don't get data to look better and we cannot get inside our schools for these kinds of competitions. If they're not appropriate, then winter will be impacted as well.
Hey, Bill, are you hearing anything? Are you hearing anything from the legislation body?
No, but we've not heard anything from the legislative body. That we do keep in contact with State Department of Education and with USA Kansas. They're aware of where we are. We use these groups and these superintendents and these ADs, the KSHSAA, but those are not elected officials. Those are state employees or local district employees, but they're the ones implementing it. They're going forward there. One of the things, Greg, and one of the things that we looked at, just so that we'll throw this out, is, well, let's just keep the spring in the spring and move the fall to after. The problem with moving the fall to after is you go fall season followed by fall season. The fall season of June and July, followed by the fall season of August, September, October, November. That's a lot of wear and tear for kids to be in the same activity. So we didn't feel it was right to go back to back with football, back to back with cross country, back to back with girls tennis, girls boys soccer, girls golf, etc. So having that break of a different season in between seemed better from a physiological perspective, as well as for a mental health perspective for our coaches and our athletes.
Does the staff, maybe we can hear from some of the other staff, do you guys have any idea the amount of numbers of schools that this could impact at this point? I mean, I know that I'm sitting in Johnson County and Shawnee Mission, Blue Valley, a lot of my local area schools. This could be something that they would look at because we don't know if we're ever going to have a chance to get back on the field. And I know I've read a little bit about Sedgwick County, but I just kind of getting an overall, maybe somebody on the board will have some information, but I'm just kind of curious how much this truly will impact our state if we were to vote for it, or if we were, or to at least, have the discussion and bring the board of directors together. Just curious, is there any data? Do we have any idea besides just what all we're doing in our schools through email and text messages with people we know?
I'm going to have the staff that are currently working with commissioners that are assigning officials probably have the best perspective on that. So Cheryl with volleyball, Mark with football, Rod with soccer. If you guys have heard from commissioners about how geographic this is or how widespread. Mark, we'll start with you.
Well, obviously, Johnson County's got its issues, Wyandotte County, Sedgwick County, or USD, the Wichita Public School 259. I just got off a Zoom with Shawnee County, and they're all going to somewhat be affected as well because of some limitations in groupings. I can't really get into all that, but basically it's going to be very difficult for football in Shawnee County unless you completely two platoon. And that's without anybody getting hurt or heat or any position changes. So they're working through that, and they're just now kind of had that conversation about an hour ago. There are some other people that are currently quarantined in all different classes around the state, from eight-player football all the way to six-player football, where full teams are quarantined to where it's just some players are quarantined. So don't know how that's going to affect some of their decisions, but we have yet to play a football game. So once we start spreading community to community, what will that do? We don't know the impact of that as of yet.
Okay, Rod, soccer.
Sure. Before I talk about soccer, I will say I was out in Quinter, Kansas today, giving a Stuco Advisor of the Year award, and it was great to see school in session there. Everyone wearing masks, and it was just that was a very positive environment today to see actually school going on and things going well, and all the alternatives they're putting in place to have it happen. Soccer wise, just like Mark said, basically what I've heard from my assigners is, of course, the Wichita Public Schools. They've canceled all invitational tournaments at this point, and they, of course, have suspended soccer for now. But every school around Wichita and the ABCTL and the private schools in Wichita are still playing, and there's still tournaments going on. I mean, May South is still hosting their tournament coming up early season. The Kansas City area, of course, is more unknown, but just speaking to the assigner there, it sounds like there are still schools playing as well, but some are still up in the air week to week, of course. So that's what I know. Outside those two metropolitan areas, it seems like everything's a go in soccer.
Cheryl?
Well, this year we're down in numbers in volleyball, of course, and we had a lot of people that chose not to officiate this year, but I think from what I understand, commissioners are getting enough officials to work those meets. I do know I talked to some people in Kansas City today, and now they have no work right now because there's no play going on, and they are willing and available to travel to neighboring geographical areas if invited to officiate. I do know that tournaments are taking place in modified structure. I talked to the AD at Marysville today. They are going to have, they're tournament on Saturday. The first day of competition is Friday. They're going to have their tournament on Saturday. They're going to do it in 2 different gymnasiums. It's going to be a quad, and no parents, no spectators are allowed. And everybody that's coming is absolutely fine with that. So I think the things that we put out to our schools, people are following, they're abiding by, and we do have several tournaments. I know Hutchinson's got a big tournament this weekend in volleyball, and it was supposed to be a 16-team tournament. As of Friday, it was going to be a 15-team, where they would put them in 3 pods of 5, and they would all play 4 matches just with those 5 schools, and then that would be it. It would count as a tournament for 5 points, but people are being creative and they're doing some things. I don't know personally what volleyball would look like in the spring, because I don't know what the willingness is of those officials to work later in the year. I have no idea. Never done that before. But anyway, that's what I know.
Fran works with all of our commissioners as well. So Fran, anything to add?
I would just say that the areas identified are probably the ones that are at this point, having the most challenges and seeing the most game cancellations. And you know, we also are aware that there are multiple board meetings taking place that may change those. So
I didn't realize we were addressing officials, but I will say in soccer, if boys and girls both were to move to spring, college seasons, of course, have moved to spring as well. There's a lot of overlap in soccer in particular with officials, and I think it would be pretty nightmarish having officials. So we'd see probably a lot of dual officiating going on rather than 3.
Well, I appreciate that. And I mean, I have to say, I appreciate your guys' work with this, you know, to give that opportunity to kids and that are going to be in a tough situation. I mean, we're all still pressing with that hopeful to play fall normal, but the reality might be something that we are not prepared for, to cancel everything and move everything into the spring. So thank you guys for at least putting this together. And I challenge our board to look at this, and if there's something I'm missing or not saying, but coming up with dates that would make sense if we did have to go in this direction.
Anybody have any more comments or suggestions or anything they'd like to discuss?
I've got one, but this is Monty. I've got one question. If we do vote to send this to the board of directors, at that point, will it appear to them exactly like it reads right now, or would there be opportunities to make changes between now and then? Or is it going to be this proposal right here, exactly how it reads?
The initial proposal will be what is approved today. Nothing is ever final until the board votes upon it. So leading up to it, there can be some suggestions for modification. At the meeting, there can be suggestions for modifications. We'll have to have Alan with his leadership lead us through that discussion and any potential changes to the draft that is eventually presented. But the actual agenda item would be to implement this protocol. We would share that with member schools tomorrow and begin to get the board ready for that discussion for a potential board meeting.
Anything further?
Mr. President, this is Mike. I'd make a motion that we ask for a special board of directors meeting to take care of this issue, try to get it as soon as we can.
Okay, got a motion by Mike,
I would second that motion.
second by Mr. Herman. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Hearing no opposition. Okay, motion carries. Bill, I guess I would have, next question for you would be on our information that you sent out today. You're looking at something on Thursday around 4 o'clock or Friday around 3 o'clock. Am I correct on that? Just so everybody's understanding that.
That is correct, and we'd like for you guys to make that decision now. It makes no difference to the staff. There's benefits to getting it done as soon as possible. There's also benefits to waiting for Friday to give one more day for you to visit with those that you represent, because as you think about today, you are representing the classification or the group from which you're selected to be on the executive board. When we transition to the board of directors meeting, your vote is a reflection of your league or that group which you represent. So, I think of Alan as a board representative of middle school. Yes, his role not going to change a whole lot, but he's still, Roger is now as a superintendent representative and as a class rep is going to represent the league that sent him there. So I think we have to give you enough time to do that. That's why we didn't want to say, hey, some would like to do it tomorrow. That probably is a little bit too quick. But by the end of this week, there's no reason we can't be ready to do it either Thursday or Friday, whatever your preference is.
Thank you. Is there a preference? Has anyone got a strong feeling for Thursday or Friday?
My preference would be Friday. I've got a little bit of a conflict, but potentially could work out of that one, but I'm not convinced. Friday would be my preference.
Selfishly, I would say the same thing. Friday is when we have scheduled our 8th grade promotion. And that's something that I probably better plan on attending, because I'm not changing that date.
Not moving that again, huh?
Nope.
Okay.
I think Friday might be better to give those board of directors members another day to look at the material and get more familiar with it.
Okay. Is there anybody opposed to doing it Friday at 3 o'clock? Because you're probably going to lose the vote anyway, but I'm just going to put it out there so that way you at least get an opportunity to voice your opinion or concern. But I just thought, I'd leave it out there. Okay, seeing nothing. Bill, I think we'll shoot for Friday at 3 o'clock.
Like a motion and a second and a vote for that, please.
Okay, I would entertain that motion.
So moved.
Motion by Greg.
I'll second.
Second by Roger. See, making sure you're awake there, Mr. Perkins.
Yeah.
Any further discussion on meeting date for Friday at 3 o'clock? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, Friday at 3, Bill.
Very good. So next steps, just to make sure you're aware of what will happen is Jeremy, I believe, has a release that we'll send to schools yet tonight that will indicate that this board meeting has been called for tomorrow morning. I'm sorry, for Friday at 3 o'clock. And that they would get further information relative to the nuts and bolts of the plan tomorrow, early in the day. We will follow that up with an opportunity for our board members to zoom in advance of the meeting, not to make decisions, but just to hear the first part of that. It's an optional meeting, but it helps them know what questions and concerns are there. You're certainly welcome to participate in that. I would anticipate that some of our board would take advantage of that, as well as some of our schools would take advantage of that.
How's it going? Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to throw.
It's always good to have visitors. I just hope it's a kid that's coming in to see Mr. Perkins, because that's nothing better than having the kids back in school. But again, we would want to provide that educational opportunity for our board so they really understand it, gives them time to think through it, to ask those questions and to do that follow-up in a timely manner. So at 3 o'clock, we'll still go through the presentation. It will be very similar to how we started today, but then it would move to a discussion and action by that board of directors. And if you guys have some points to highlight in preparation for that presentation, we would certainly welcome those. You sat through it. Our staff will refine that. We'll be good to go come Friday at 3. But again, we welcome your input in terms of the structure of that presentation, knowing that it's going to be done via Zoom.
Bill, is part of that the request to give the executive board, will that be a second question?
Yeah.
The request to give the executive board.
Yeah, we will have probably at least a 2-question agenda. Number 1 is to approve the alternative schedule to implement all of the rules that you see 30 through 43 in terms of just changing the schedule, but it will also include that yellow highlight to empower you as an executive board to do some tweaks within those rules in terms of scheduling golf tournaments, in terms of scheduling cross-country meets, and tennis tournaments. Those are the 3 that it seems like we're getting requests to consider some relief in terms of letting them start a little bit earlier. And there may be some other things that pop up, and we're not trying to surprise the board of directors, but we're also we're not trying to assume that control as a staff. We want that oversight to be deferred to you for this year only. So that would be a second question on there.
Perfect. Anything else? Mr. Faflik, do you have anything else for us?
Thank you for listening today, for engaging today, for asking the questions, and for recognizing that this unusual time that our schools are encountering requires some unusual responses. You never thought we'd be talking about a cross-country meet in April, but we might be. And that doesn't mean it's going to be the reality, but it becomes possible now. And all of this is just possible in case your school and your district ends up in that position. So we wanted to provide this relief, and hopefully it will help school leaders. This is not intended to make your job or school leaders' jobs more difficult. It truly is to provide that option should it need to be exercised as we move into the weeks and months ahead. We've got a lot to learn. And a lot of that will come through experience. As Mark said, we haven't played a football game yet. That's still 2 weeks away. We still have, 9 more practices before that becomes a reality. 8 after today before they're going to start playing in most cases. So, but we'll be ready when that time comes. So thank you, Executive Board. Thank you very much.
Does anybody else on the executive board have anything for Bill and the staff? Hearing none, seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting. So moved by Greg.
Second.
Second by Dina. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Thank you, executive board members. Look forward to seeing you again on Friday. Bill, staff, thank you.
Thank you, guys. See everybody Friday.
Everybody have a good week.